Hi there, David Taylor or Mr. Pelargonium, back with another video for the Pelargonium and Geranium Society. Now in this post-show period, for someone like myself who exhibits in June, it's all about cutting back show plants. So let's get going and have a look. Right, hello there and welcome back to the channel. Now, I'm filming this on the very last day of June. It's Friday, the 30th of June. Now, in this post-show period, the sort of turn of the month, late June, early July, is the time that we cut back our exhibition plants. Now, you know, I realise that anyone else watching this that may exhibit during July or even August mixed with other plants. There are lots of shows mixed with other plants. I know that, you know, you're going to be able to potentially do this a bit later in the season. Right, now in terms of Regals, I do like to cut my Regals back quite hard. I'll show you an example of one I did earlier. Now, I did this the other day and I've actually filmed it, and I'm going to insert the film in a moment, so you can see exactly what's happened. Now this was a really big plant. It's Brian Pope, is one of Martin Pope's plants, who incidentally, it was nice to see him at the show at Rosemore this year as well. I haven't seen him in a number of years, so it's really good to see him again. Now I didn't actually use this for show this year, but it was one that was sort of almost a runner-up, if you like, in my plants that I had for the show this year. So what I will do, I will insert that video now and you can see exactly how I went about cutting this back. It's obviously using a sharp knife, and it's obviously, as always, ensuring that you're keeping it very sort of more or less dry before you start the cut back process. So I'll insert that now. Now I'm actually going to find some nice clippers. Now this one I'm actually going to cut back ridiculously hard. Sometimes I cut back by about a third, other times I cut back by even more. But this one I'm actually going to cut back massively hard. As Bob Clark, who you will no doubt see a fair number of his Regals in the video of the 2023 show, he recommends going down to just nothing but stumps. But I do like to potentially see, even on hardwood, where things can break. So I'm going to go back relatively hard so we can open up the branches here, just so that we can see where we're going to cut down to. So I'm initially just getting rid of all these blooms. The majority of these blooms are going over now. Now, a lot of these would come back a bit later in the summer. We often find the Regals have a second blush in the later summer, but just flower relatively sporadically during the rest of the summer, albeit in a glass house, that is. Outside they can continue to bloom relatively well. So I am just randomly just hacking into these branches. A little bit of white fly there, nothing too extensive, just so that I can see what I'm doing. I'm just cutting. There's a stem there that's fairly limp. Dead leaf. So let's go down, take that one out. And this has been planted quite deep. I can assure you that it is just one plant. There is sort of two stems, but it is, I can guarantee you, just one plant. Now, as I said, the key thing with this, so you need to ensure that it's dry but not bone dry. A little hint of dampness in the base of the root ball there. When I look underneath, it's just a hint damp. but not wet. And there we are, we're sort of almost done at the sort of base level here. Well, we've just given it an initial cut, I suppose, that's what you would say. Now we can begin to examine these branches. Right, so I've closed right in now so you can get an idea of what's going on. Now, down in this branch is probably a good one to give an example to. We have got lots and lots of breaks going on. There's one there, there's two actual small breaks just in there. Well, another break there, another break there. So we can certainly get the knife in on that one. There's one underneath as well. So it's all debating as to where I'm going to go, and I'm going to go deep. Let's do the Bob Clark technique and go really deep. So, as always, I'm using a very sharp knife. I can actually clasp this branch quite hard because I don't want any of this growth above here. Just be careful though when using a very sharp knife like this, and there we are. So all that's come off. Got a break there, got a little break in there, got one underneath. Now the whole idea here is going to be to balance this off. Now in here we got exactly the same thing going on. A little break stem there, we've got one there, got one underneath, got one there. So I'm going to take this down to this break here. This is, you can perhaps see, on the borderline of hardwood and green softer wood. It goes down to there. So you can see this is sort of brown, it's just beginning to break to hardwood. So now we're going to mimic the other side. This has been buried. It is just one plant, I can assure you. So we go up to this one next. This has got to come down quite a bit. So we'll take that one down to that inner break there. That may need to go down more, this tall stem sticking out the top. That's that one. Stem there. So there we are, that one's sort of breaking on its own belt there. This may at some point need a repot because it's over this way a bit. You can probably see, looking at that angle, this is over this side of the pot. That's that one. Dead leaf there, a couple of stipules. And so we got one down in there. I'm going to just nip that one again. Got a young green leaf stem down at the base, which I'm just going to cut back. Get rid of that leaf, don't need it, we can cut back anyway. So it's what we're going to do with this one. So are we going to go, I think we're going to have to go down to this one here. We've got lots of little breaks, look, just down on that base. You may be able to see them. There's one tiny one there. So I'm going to go down to here. Yeah, that's that one. This won't need much in the way of watering at all. I am going to just cut that back. But the thing is, when you do start watering this again, it will need a balanced feed. Just looking at the height. See, the height of that branch is equivalent to that break there. So I'm going to take this off even more. What I tend to do, I tend to slice these on a nail so that you're never going to be... Yeah, they're the same height now, more or less, so I'll leave that one. And there we go, that's a Regal cutback, a hard Regal cutback. But you can do it because, as I've said, you can see in here Hopefully you can see there's a little break there. Even in the hardwood, Regals will break on hardwood, and here got a multitude of breaks potentially happening. Hopefully you can see those in the camera there. There's a multitude of breaks potentially going on all along this hardwood. Yeah, so there we go. That's that one done. I mean, it really does show you how I go about doing it. I mean, realistically, if you want to carry on growing your Regals, I mean, I've got a fair number of larger ones outside that are just growing away. You can grow them on, enjoy them. Regals themselves in the summer, they do sort of slow up a little bit on the flowering, but once the days start shortening in August, you usually find that they sort of come back a bit. So it's worth noting that. But certainly for the ones that I've cut back, this for me in terms of exhibition is just getting the growth to re-trigger sort of for new growth next year. Now, I will probably repot this in the sort of late summer. It was done, I repotted this in February, actually, this particular one, just to give it fresh compost to then grow on through into next year. I mean, obviously, if you've got sort of plants that you want to keep a bit bigger, it's no problem at all. This is sort of more or less for exhibition purposes. You can do it yourself if you want to get really tight, bushy plants. And talking of that, I mean, we have had some that missed the boat. I think I did touch on it last week. But this Shriven and Pearl is still going, and this one really did miss the boat. It's done very well. Some of the blooms are just beginning to darken. But this really is a superb plant of my Shriven and Pearl. It's a shame that it missed the boat because I think this is an absolute corker. But I had one that I did take to show that was marginally lopsided, but this one was very balanced, and I'm just letting that one stay as it is until the last, well, as soon as the blooms start going over, I probably will cut it back, but that's one that just missed the shows, unfortunately, just came too late. More bizarre scenario, of course, because I always have to stop my Regals in the sort of just around the Christmas time, just after Christmas. It is quite odd, but that's when that was stopped. Really weird. I mean, you could argue that I need to go even earlier. It is a strange situation, purely down to the situation of my glass house, where in the winter it is a slightly duller than perhaps one that's in a bit more of an open environment. Now, zonals are done in exactly the same way. Now, the main difference with zonals, of course, when you're cutting them back now, is that you can use what you cut off as cutting material, which you generally wouldn't recommend for Regals at this time, because there's still a lot of flower stems growing. As I've said many a time, Regals throw separate flower stems to the growth stems, whereas zonals don't. They flower and grow on the same stems. So you can use this material that you cut off for cuttings. Now, this plant is 2020, so for next year will be fairly old. One of the problems I find with zonals is that once they get to 4 years old, they are sort of pushing it for their usefulness in being able to be a good show plant, because you're getting some sort of relatively hard wood at the base here, but I'm looking down at this plant which has got sort of relatively hard wood down through, and there are a fair number of little tiny green breaks coming out of this hard wood. And so I'm going to sort of close in and I will speed through this, primarily because I have shown it before. So I'll give you an idea of what to do, and you can slow it up on your browser if you wish to do that. But I will close in. This is one of my own Shrivenham stars, and I'll show you how I'm going to cut it back. And at the end, I'll show you some of the cutting material that I can get out of it. trying to tidy it up a little bit. There's a few obviously slightly dead petals and a few dead leaves that have just dropped off. But that's sort of very balanced. I'm looking down from the top. It's the same. It's the same scenario as always, looking for the shape. But that's been cut back quite hard. But you will see, hopefully you can see, that there are loads and loads of little breaks just appearing all over these wooden stems from where the plant is going to shoot out. There's loads of them. You can particularly see those two. I mean, there are many. There's some down there. Hopefully you can see that. Some down there. There's one in there. There's loads all down through this plant. I will repot this in, this hasn't been repotted since October last year. So I will repot this in the late summer. I will just let this begin to just burst through and then I will repot it, just trim up the roots a bit. I'll probably show that in the autumn. And that one will hopefully grow back to be a really good show plant next year. Now, in terms of cuttings, there are so many that I've cut off here that I could use. I've got some pretty small ones, which I would probably just chuck. And I've got some slightly bigger ones. Again, it doesn't matter really if they're flowering because zonals flower and grow on the same stems. But the one thing I will say is that once you find a stem that you want to use for cuttings, you do need to break that bloom off. You don't want the effort of the plant going into production of flower. So in this case, I'm just going to snap that off. But I mean, that would be a good cutting. I have got a playlist of taking cuttings for you to look at to get real detailed information. All that I'm going to do with this is just take it up a little bit to below a node. I've got this honed in here. So, I mean, this is quite a good cutting. You've got a choice. You've got a little break there going on as well. You've got a side shoot here. So it's up to you whether you want to retain those. But we've got a little side break there. I think in this case, I will cut that off. So there's a perfect little cutting. We've got a growth point at the top. I've taken the bloom out. Got a side shoot there, we've got a side shoot there, we've got a side shoot coming out the other side. So all I'm going to do is just literally cut that down to the node. Now I've obviously gone down to another node in cutting it back. But that's right underneath a node now. You can probably see just about a line, barely a millimetre above the millimetre below rather the cut. And that's ready to, what I would do with that now is just let that seal off on a dry day. That'll just take maybe no more than an hour, day like today. And then you just mix up your compost and stick it in, zock it down into the compost. Simple as that. I've got, as I say, I've got detailed videos about that. For you to look at if you really want more detail. Just put it in your well-drained compost. The zonals will root, particularly on sort of semi-hard wood like this, very, very quickly, within probably 2 weeks, 3 at the absolute most, but 2 weeks realistically. But that's an ideal cutting. But I've got plenty of Shrivenham stars coming on, so I don't need to retain that one. So there we are, that's where we are at the moment. I'm in the process of cutting sort of all my sort of potential show plants back now at this stage. And indeed, I will be growing a number of sort of newer ones on. That's another process. I mean, in a way, young plants, for instance, say this Robin Louise, I never actually exhibited any sort of stellas much this year. But this is growing on and this is a young plant and that will get up to a 6-inch pot and I will exhibit that almost certainly next year. So the other side of the coin is young plants that you've grown on that I've taken cuttings from. This is exactly a year old, 12th of June last year, this cutting. So this will be grown on now to produce a show plant for next year. That's the other side of new plants coming through for the future, which you've always got that backup and that circulation of plants going for growing into future years. There is a lot of forward planning that does go on, certainly when you grow for exhibition anyway. Now, one that I will mention is our test plant. I'm not going to do, I always like to do specific videos about the test plant, but the test plant is fine. It's grown very well. I didn't take it to the shows primarily because we had a lot of hot weather just leading up to the shows and the blooms were just going over. And all of these blooms have sort of gone over now. But this is actually doing very well. It's got a fairly good shape. And we'll look at that separately. I'm probably, because this is, just a dwarf, I will keep this going for the time being. And we'll, as I say, we'll do it together when I think that there's something that I need to do to it. But it's growing very well. I will probably keep this going for a few more weeks before I give it a little trim, just to give it a good shape ready for growing on for next year. And I'm hopeful that we'll get this as a dwarf for next year's show. There is an argument that we could potentially try and get it into a floribunda because it will grow on fairly quickly now. But I think we ought to stick to our guns and try and get it as a dwarf. So we'll see how that goes. Now, upcoming, I will do some videos about some of my young standards that I've got growing on, because I've got quite a few bicolours growing well. These are all pretty decent. These are all getting to the height now that I want to start splitting them for their head. So I'll do a separate video for that. So we got the Peg Summer Show one, which will almost certainly follow this video in about a week or so. I can't be absolutely precise because it's a very busy time of year for me, obviously. So you have indeed got plenty to look forward to. So that's just about it from me for today, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.